They left Bravos in the hush of early morning. Dawn's first pink light clung to the canals as Daenerys, Jon, still calling himself Aegon among Targaryens, Viserys, and Varys boarded a barge bound for Pentos. After weeks of tense negotiations and uneasy truces, the exiled Targaryens decided that Illyrio, a wealthy magister and old friend of Varys, might prove a better host than the cramped villa in Bravos. Ser Willem Darry, warned from the turmoil and the uncertainty of finances, reluctantly agreed, urging them to be careful. They left him behind, hopeful he would remain safe under Bravosi neutrality. Torm, the Red Priest, came along, silent and watchful, sensing that R'hlloreth's hand guided these Targaryen destinies. The barge drifted across the lagoon, then ventured into open water, following a coastal route to Pentos. In the hold, Shadowfire was absent, left behind in a secluded swamp near Bravos with trusted freedmen. Jon thought it best not to parade a dragon of monstrous size into every city they visited. Viserys sulked, resentful at the prospect of traveling without the great beast, but Daenerys quietly endorsed Jon's caution. She recognized that word of a massive black dragon, and the presence of newly revealed Targaryen heirs, could spark chaos. At least in Pentos, they expected a measure of discretion under Illyrio's roof. The day was mild, a slight breeze rippling the water's surface. Varys stood at the prow, exchanging small talk with the barge's captain. From time to time, Jon caught the spider watching their group, no doubt gauging the latest shifts in alliances. Daenerys spent much of the journey on deck, gazing at the horizon. Jon joined her often, picking at the humble meals provided by the crew. They spoke quietly of the future. Daenerys had grown bolder since discovering Shadowfire. She insisted her brother refrain from forcing any Dothraki betrothal. Viserys obeyed for now, but Jon could tell he seethed. He had glimpsed the older Targaryen pacing the barge's narrow corridors at night, muttering about lost birthrights. Torm, the Red Priest, seemed drawn to Daenerys in a spiritual sense. He would stand near her in the morning sun, eyes half closed, proclaiming she carried a warmth that resonated with R'hlloreth's favor. Daenerys, for her part, was polite but neither embraced nor dismissed Torm's faith outright. After a week at sea, they reached the broad harbor of Pentos. Wide quays bristled with vessels from half a dozen cities. Rising behind them were the domed villas and tall towers of wealthy magisters. The day was hot, the sun reflecting off pale stone. The harbor's smell was a blend of spices, fish, and perfumed oils. Illyrio name opened doors promptly. A retinue of his household guards, clad in bright livery, escorted the travelers from the dock to a palatial manse on the outskirts of the city. There, under high arches and courtyard fountains, Illyrio appeared with open arms, exuding feigned modesty. He was a large man with an elaborately curled mustache and a wide grin that glimmered with cunning. "Welcome, my dear friends," he proclaimed, clapping his hands. "And welcome, too, to these esteemed Targaryens. Pleases me immensely to host you all. Varys has told me only a little, but enough to know we have much to discuss." He bowed with extravagant flourish to Daenerys and Viserys, then gave Jon a measuring look. "And you, the rumored nephew Aegon Targaryen. Fascinating indeed. Your presence is a rare gift." Viserys bristled at Illyrio's ingratiating tone, but forced a stiff nod. Daenerys offered a small smile. She found Illyrio strange but courteous enough. Jon watched the interplay, recalling how Illyrio had once sheltered Viserys and Daenerys in years past. The man was rumored to be wealthy beyond measure, dealing in spices, gems, and many hidden intrigues. Torm lurked behind them, quietly observing. The magister led them through opulent corridors, the floors inlaid with mosaic scenes of dragons entwined with serpents, the walls hung with tapestries showing Associ legends. Slaves bustled about, bearing trays of chilled wine and platters of exotic fruits. Illyrio prattled about his delight in reviving old Targaryen connections, ignoring the uneasy glances Jon and Daenerys exchanged at the presence of enslaved servants. Jon, having waged battles against slavers elsewhere, found it difficult not to scowl. But this was not the moment to start conflict. At length, they arrived in a shaded courtyard where broad pillars framed a marble fountain. Cushions and low tables invited them to recline. Illyrio settled onto a couch with surprising grace for such a heavy-set man, gesturing for his guests to relax. "Now, I have a surprise for you, dear Daenerys," he said, summoning a slave boy who bore a velvet-draped basket. "A token of my admiration and a reflection of your ancestral heritage." Daenerys exchanged a quick look with Jon, curiosity sparking in her eyes. The boy set the basket on a table, pulling away the cloth to reveal 3 large eggs. Their shells glistened like polished stone, each a distinct hue, one a deep emerald flecked with gold, another pale cream laced with swirling blue veins, the last a rich blackish crimson that caught the light in mesmerizing patterns. Viserys leaned in, momentarily forgetting his sulk, while Daenerys let out a soft gasp of awe. Jon felt an odd stirring at the sight of them. The eggs emitted a faint aura that he, attuned to draconic energies, sensed more acutely than ever. "They are dragon eggs," Illyrio purred, pleased by Daenerys' reaction. "From the Shadowlands beyond Ashai, so the story goes. They have turned to stone over the centuries, or so the legends say. Still, they are a fitting tribute to the last scions of House Targaryen, no?" He reached out to gingerly stroke the green and gold egg, as though revering some ancient relic. "Most would keep them as curiosities, but perhaps in your hands, they may hold deeper meaning." Daenerys' eyes shone. She touched each egg in turn, fingertips gently brushing the shells as though they might be fragile. Jon watched her, noting how a subtle warmth lit her face. He recalled the day he had found that single black egg beneath Winterfell, how it had felt inert at first, then gradually awakened under heat and faith. Could these eggs likewise hide living creatures within? The possibility rattled him. He still had Shadowfire, that gargantuan black beast. If Daenerys now hatched 3 more dragons, what would that mean for the future? Tormund, the Red Priest, moved closer, lips parted as though sensing the same intangible vibration. He murmured a prayer to Lawler under his breath. Viserys, meanwhile, tried to mask his own fascination, clearing his throat. "They are indeed impressive," he said, "though likely just stone. But a fine gift, Illyrio. My sister appreciates them, I'm sure." Daenerys looked up, meeting Illyrio's gaze. "Thank you," she said sincerely, though her voice trembled. "They are beautiful, more than I can say." Illyrio smiled, patting his ample belly. "As a hostess, Pentos can offer many delights, but none so rare as these. Think of it as a symbol that House Targaryen's fortunes may yet be revived." Jon shifted. "Might we rest from the journey? Then we can speak of matters pressing to the Targaryen cause." "Of course," Illyrio agreed. "I have prepared chambers for each of you. Food, wine, anything you desire. My home is yours. We shall talk at supper about future alliances." They retired to luxurious suites, each lavishly decorated with silks and cushions. Jon found the sudden opulence stifling after weeks of travel. Still, he appreciated a chance to bathe and change clothes. Tormund hovered, saying little, but Jon sensed the priest's focus had narrowed on those 3 eggs. Indeed, Jon himself couldn't stop recalling the faint pulse he'd felt when Daenerys touched them. That evening, they gathered in Illyrio's grand dining hall. A feast of spiced lamb, honeyed duck, fresh fish, and succulent fruits awaited. Slaves poured them sweet wines. Jon ate sparingly, mind spinning with thoughts of these eggs. Daenerys sat near him, wearing a lavender gown that Illyrio must have provided. Viserys lounged at her other side, trying to appear regal despite his worn garments. At one point, Daenerys leaned to Jon, her voice hushed under the drone of conversation. "Jon? Or should I call you Aegon?" She smiled shyly. "I cannot shake the feeling that these eggs are not mere stone. There's something alive about them." Jon's gaze flicked to Viserys and Illyrio, who were talking about potential alliances. "I know what you mean," he said. "When I found Shadowfire's egg, it was cold at first, but then it warmed under heat and the Red Priest's rituals. If you wish, I can ask Tormund to examine them." He is deeply versed in R'hllorès lore. She nodded, eyes gleaming with cautious hope. Yes, in time. I do not wish to alarm my brother just yet. He might see it as a threat to his claim, though perhaps he would exult in the idea of new dragons. Jon suppressed a wry grin. He exults only in what he can control. Be careful. Daenerys did not disagree. Soon, Illyrio raised a toast to House Targaryen, prattling about how the realm might one day rejoice at its rightful rulers returning in triumph. Varys, sipping his wine discreetly, contributed mild commentary about the state of Westeros. King Robert's hunts, rumors of Lannister intrigues, the uncertain loyalties of southern lords. None of it surprised Jon, but the discussion made Viserys stiff with longing to reclaim a throne he had never seen. Daenerys remained quiet, more intrigued by the mystical possibility of living eggs than by the dryness of political alliances. Tormund ate in silence, clearly biding his time. That night, Daenerys asked permission to keep the eggs in her chamber. Illyrio obliged, and Viserys merely waved a dismissive hand. She placed them in a low, broad bowl near a brazier, coaxing them with gentle warmth. Tormund appeared late, requesting an audience with her. Jon accompanied him, uncertain how far Daenerys' trust in the Red Priest went. She admitted them with a hesitant smile, ushering them toward the brazier where the eggs lay, faintly glimmering in the firelight. Tormund bowed, incanting something in High Valyrian that Jon could only partly decipher. Daenerys watched curiously, hugging a shawl around her shoulders. The room smelled of scented oils and the tang of hot coals. One egg, crimson-veined black, seemed to catch a flicker of brightness along its scales. Tormund, eyes half-lidded, placed his hand just above that shell, chanting in a low monotone. Jon felt the hair on his arms rise. Something about the energies swirling here reminded him of the night he had hatched Shadowfire. Daenerys let out a gasp as the egg grew momentarily warm. Then the glow subsided, leaving only a subtle shimmer. "They are not stone," Tormund murmured softly. "Life stirs within, as with the egg you once tended, my prince." He glanced at Jon, then to Daenerys. "But they require more than heat. They require faith, sacrifice, and the hand of fate. R'hllorès flame can awaken them, if the time is right." Daenerys' cheeks flushed with excitement. "Then it may be possible? Real dragons." She sank onto a cushion, cradling her thoughts. "I fear what Viserys might do if he learns these eggs might hatch. He craves power so much. Yet I cannot hide them from him." Jon crouched by the brazier. "He already knows the eggs exist, but not that they might hatch. Let us proceed carefully. Perhaps we can prepare a private ceremony, with Tormund guiding us. If indeed they stir, you should be the one to claim them." She nodded gratefully. Tormund chanted another brief prayer, then withdrew. Jon escorted him out, leaving Daenerys to her contemplations. As Jon passed the corridor, he glimpsed Viserys lurking near a pillar, scowling. Likely he was offended at not being included. Jon said nothing, continuing on. He had no wish to spark a fight in the middle of Illyrio's manse. Days slipped by, with Illyrio hosting lavish meals, ensuring the Targaryens appeared in suitably expensive clothing, parading them before selected Pentos notables to gauge interest in a Targaryen restoration. Behind these social appearances, a quiet tension simmered. Viserys grew restless, complaining that he saw no progress in forging alliances. He spoke often of cunning ways to bribe the Golden Company or woo the Dothraki. Jon remained cautious, mindful of revealing Shadowfire. He had left the freedmen near Bravos, tending the dragon in secrecy, uncertain how to move such a colossal beast without inciting panic in Pentos. Daenerys spent her free hours with the three eggs, bonding with them in her own gentle manner. Tormund occasionally joined her, murmuring prayers to R'hllor. Jon himself looked on with mixed feelings, part awe at the possibility of new dragons, part worry about how the realm might react to multiple winged beasts. One evening, Illyrio announced a special celebration in honor of his guests. The manse filled with music, exotic dancers, and a veritable torrent of spiced wines. Local Pentoshi magisters arrived, wearing gaudy silks, eager to curry favor with the rumored Targaryen heirs. Jon endured the spectacle with quiet stoicism, sipping water instead of wine. Daenerys seemed overwhelmed by the swirl of colors and the flirtatious remarks from older men. Viserys drank heavily, occasionally bragging about the day we crossed the sea, and dropping hints that House Targaryen had unexpected might. Jon nearly strangled him for referencing Shadowfire. He intervened discreetly whenever Viserys' tongue grew too loose, steering conversations to safer ground. Tormund stood at the periphery, chanting or gazing into flickering braziers. At the height of the revelry, Illyrio beckoned the Targaryens to a dais near the head of the banquet hall. Musicians played a lilting tune as slaves presented trays of sweetmeats. The temperature rose in the crowded space, and braziers glowed with fire. Daenerys wore a shimmering gown in pale blue that offset her silver-gold hair. Viserys, clad in new finery courtesy of Illyrio, looked more regal than usual but still exuded arrogance. Varys lurked among the guests, smiling amiably at everything while doubtless absorbing every whisper. Jon lingered near Daenerys' side, half-guard, half-confident, ignoring the sidelong glances of the magisters who tried to guess his identity. After the feast, Daenerys slipped away to her chamber, exhausted by the show. Jon followed at a discreet distance, concerned that Viserys might accost her with fresh demands. He found her in the corridor, the 3 eggs cradled in her arms. She carried them wherever she went now, an attachment forming that reminded Jon of the early days with Shadowfire's egg. She smiled wanly when she saw him. "It was too loud," she murmured. "I needed to be with something real, if that makes sense." He nodded understandingly. "I feel the same. All that pomp and chatter wears on me. Have you considered speaking to Tormund about a private ceremony yet? The eggs seem to react to his presence, and perhaps we can expedite whatever spark they need." She swallowed, looking thoughtful. "Yes, perhaps soon. I sense they are hungrier for warmth. I keep them by a brazier nightly, but it feels insufficient. The air here is not as hot as the deserts of old Valyria might have been. Yet they respond when I handle them for a while." Jon recalled how, in his own experience, it had taken a conflagration and the Red Priest's fervent incantations to awaken Shadowfire. If these eggs likewise demanded intense fire, that alone was risky. A massive blaze in Illyrio's manse would raise all manner of questions. But if the hatching succeeded, Daenerys would gain dragons of her own, and the Targaryen cause would acquire formidable power. The idea both thrilled and terrified him. One monstrous dragon was enough of a burden. 3 more might reshape Essos overnight. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "speak with Tormund. Let him see if we can perform a small ceremony. We'll keep it private, just a handful of us. If the eggs respond, we'll keep the event hidden from Pentoshi eyes. If they remain dormant, no harm done." She nodded, hugging the eggs close. They parted ways, and Jon retreated to his own quarters, half expecting Viserys to corner him. But the older Targaryen never appeared. Perhaps he had drunk himself into a stupor or found some other diversion. The next day, Daenerys did indeed approach Tormund. She found him in a secluded courtyard where an ornate fountain gurgled beneath high, vine-draped walls. He was praying before a modest brazier. A pair of Illyrio's slaves stood watch, curious about the Red Priest's presence. Daenerys asked them to leave, and they obeyed her gentle command. Jon, lurking nearby, stepped forward. Together, they explained to Tormund that they desired a discreet ritual to test the eggs, to see if R'hlloreth's flame would stir them more fully. Tormund was delighted, or as close to delight as his stoic demeanor allowed. He whispered that the hour of twilight might be best for such a rite, that the boundary between day and night would enhance the potency of his prayers. Daenerys agreed. Jon offered to stand witness and to keep watch for any intrusions. Tormund insisted that if the eggs had the potential for life, Daenerys must be the focal point. Jon's presence as a Targaryen might help, for he carried that draconic blood which had once awakened Shadowfire. They resolved to find a private space in Illyrio's estate, away from prying eyes. That evening, with the sun dipping low over the Pentos skyline, they convened in a small walled garden near the manse's rear. High hedges and tall columns shielded them from casual onlookers. Daenerys wore a simple robe, not the finery of a banquet. Jon stood at her side, arms folded, scanning for threats. Tormund had prepared a ring of braziers, each stoked with resin and scented wood. The pungent smoke curled upward, shimmering in the twilight. Viserys was not invited, for fear his presence would disrupt the fragile energy. He had retreated to his chamber earlier, complaining of a headache. Varys, suspecting something, had quietly chosen to remain inside. Perhaps he respected their secrecy. In the circle of dancing firelight, Daenerys placed the 3 eggs. Tormund, chanting in a language older than Valyria, walked the perimeter, occasionally tapping the braziers to release fresh sparks. Jon felt the swirl of heat intensify, the smoke taking on a hypnotic quality. Daenerys knelt by the eggs, pressing her hands against them. One was the emerald flecked with gold, the second that cream and blue swirl, the third that dark red-black reminiscent of volcanic ash. Each shell reflected the flames in eerie patterns. Tormund's voice rose, rhythmic, punctuated by the crackle of burning resin. Jon sensed a familiar hum in his blood, reminiscent of the day Shadowfire's egg cracked open. The air grew heavy, charged with potential. Daenerys, eyes shut, murmured an uncertain prayer, perhaps to R'hllor, perhaps to some ancient Targaryen ancestor. Jon stepped behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. His presence, as another Targaryen whose dragon had already hatched, might fortify the energies. Tormund concluded one chant and began another, switching to the common tongue for fragments of prophecy. Blood of the dragon, awakened by flame, the Lord of Light calls forth life from cold stone. Rise, creatures of Valyria, guardians reborn. The braziers flared unexpectedly, spitting embers that spiraled across the circle. Daenerys gasped. The green-gold egg began to glow softly. The swirling shells of the other 2 followed suit, faint pulses of luminescence traveling across their surfaces. Jon inhaled sharply. The scene resembled the moment in his past when he had glimpsed the first cracks forming in Shadowfire's shell. Yet these eggs, by all accounts, were older, half-petrified. Would a single ceremony suffice to break them open? Tormund pressed the advantage, intensifying his chanting. Flames hissed. The smoke thickened. Daenerys placed her palms firmly on the shells, tears pricking her eyes. "I can feel them," she whispered, voice trembling. "They're stirring, Jon." Jon moved closer, resting one hand on the dark red-black egg. The surface felt hot to the touch, tingling with life. His mind whirled with the recollection of how his own dragon had needed a massive conflagration, fed by R'hllor's magic over many nights. Was this enough for all 3? Possibly not. Tormund seemed to sense the same concern. He released a final chant, arms raised, calling upon R'hllor to bless the unborn dragons. The braziers roared skyward in unison, blazing bright enough to momentarily dazzle them. Heat washed over the garden like a furnace. Daenerys cried out, not in pain, but in awe. Then, abruptly, the flames subsided. The braziers dimmed as though a gust of wind snuffed their life force. The swirling glow on the eggs flickered, then faded to faint embers. Daenerys, panting, looked at Tormund with desperate eyes. They were so close. I felt them move. Tormund wiped sweat from his brow. They have stirred indeed, but their shells are thick with centuries of dormancy. A single ceremony may not suffice. They require stronger flame, deeper sacrifice. The Lord of Light asks for more. Jon recalled how the Red Priests had used a great pyre for Shadowfire's hatching, risking everything in the blazing inferno. They had also spilled blood in R'hllor's name. The memory brought a chill to his spine, for he knew the old words, "Only death can pay for life." Would Daenerys be forced to offer such a sacrifice? He placed a hand on her shoulder again. She nodded, blinking tears from her lashes. "I understand," she said softly. "We have woken them, but not enough. They must not return to stillness." Torum's gaze flicked to Jon. Perhaps you can share the knowledge of your experience. You who hatched a dragon egg before. If we replicate the conditions, these shells might crack. He paused, uncertainty in his eyes. But if that includes blood sacrifice, it is a grave step. R'hllor does not accept half measures. Jon exhaled shakily. We must be cautious. We cannot set Illyrio's manse ablaze in a grand pyre. That would betray our presence and alarm the entire city. Another path might exist. Perhaps an open area outside Pentos or even in the desert lands to the east, where we can conjure enough heat. But it would require planning and secrecy. Daenerys traced her fingers along the eggs one last time. Then let us plan. I will not give up on them. They stirred. Jon. We must help them cross the threshold. They ended the ceremony as the last ribbons of smoke curled upward. While Daenerys carefully wrapped the eggs in cloth, Jon noticed a faint crack along the surface of the blackish-red shell. It was minuscule, barely visible in the dim light. He pointed it out quietly to Daenerys. Her eyes widened with joy, but Torum cautioned that it might reseal if the embryo within lacked proper warmth. Gently, she pressed a hand over that crack, as though offering reassurance. Then they blew out the braziers, scattering the ashes. Before leaving the garden, Torum offered a final prayer to R'hllor, hoping the seeds of life would not go cold. They slipped back into the manse. Viserys, unbeknownst to them, had woken from his drunken stupor and was wandering the halls. Jon froze at the sight of him, standing near a corner with a candle in hand. The older Targaryen's eyes narrowed suspiciously at the group returning from the walled garden. "What mischief are you up to?" he demanded. "Sneaking around at night with your red priest? Sister, you carry those eggs everywhere now. Are you whispering nonsense into her ear? Nephew?" Daenerys clutched the cloth-wrapped eggs protectively. "No nonsense, brother. Only reverence for our heritage." She tried to walk past him, but Viserys blocked her path, candlelight flickering across his resentful face. Jon stepped between them, voice firm. "Let her pass, Viserys. She is not your plaything. The eggs belong to her if she wills it." Viserys sneered. "Oh, so you say, but I recall you have a monstrous dragon hidden away somewhere. Why should Daenerys alone claim these relics? They represent the entire house's might. I am the rightful king here, not her, not you." Torum, standing behind them, gripped his staff. Daenerys, mustering courage, met Viserys' glare. "The eggs were a gift to me. I do not hoard them out of greed. I only wish to understand them." Her voice trembled, but she refused to yield. Viserys slapped the wall in frustration, rattling an ornate sconce. "I see how it is. You conspire with the bastard nephew, plan your own path to power. If these eggs truly stir, I should be the first to claim the hatchlings. Not you, not him." Jon clenched his jaw, recalling that Daenerys had once confided her fear of being sold to the Dothraki. He would not let Viserys bully her. "Your arrogance blinds you, uncle. The eggs respond to Daenerys' touch. If you cared about the house, you'd let her explore their potential. If they hatch, we all benefit." Viserys looked ready to explode, but then his shoulders slumped. "Very well," he muttered. "But if they hatch, remember who the rightful king is. I won't have my sister overshadow me." He stepped aside, letting them pass, though his glare lingered like a curse. Once in Daenerys' chamber, they hurriedly barred the door. She set the eggs by a brazier, keeping them warm through the night. Torum bowed, excusing himself to retire. Jon lingered a moment, ensuring that Daenerys felt safe after Viserys' outburst. She offered him a tired smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "He is so lost in his rage." Jon nodded. "We'll handle him carefully. For now, rest. Tomorrow, we'll see what we can do about forging a safer environment for a true hatching." She agreed, and he departed, hoping that Viserys would not cause havoc in his jealous state. Over the following days, word reached Illyrio's manse that King Robert's court in Westeros remained preoccupied with hunts, feasts, and petty disputes. Varys, receiving ravens and coded messages, reported that no new Targaryen hunts had been launched. For the time being, the realm seemed unaware of the triple threat forming in Essos. Jon breathed relief at the respite, though he suspected that if they did manage to hatch more dragons, secrecy would become exponentially harder to maintain. Perhaps they'd need to relocate deeper into Essos, near the Red Waste or some remote corner where the pyre could burn without interference. Illyrio, for his part, noticed Daenerys' devotion to the eggs and teased her about mothering stone. She responded politely, never hinting at what was transpiring. Jon guessed that the cunning magister suspected more than he let on. He occasionally pressed Jon about the rumored black dragon, calling it a wondrous advantage in the Targaryen cause. Jon kept his answers vague, insisting that caution was paramount. Illyrio's eyes glimmered with avarice whenever the topic of dragons arose, so Jon remained guarded. Eventually, Tormund declared he had found a suitable place for a second, more intense ceremony. Outside Pentos, in a stretch of barren fields near a deserted watchtower, there was a clearing that might host a larger flame without prying eyes. At night, few travelers ventured there, and Illyrio's men seldom patrolled. Daenerys agreed, eager to feed the eggs the fire they needed. The plan was simple. They would slip out under darkness, bring braziers, oil, and the eggs, then attempt a grand rite akin to the one that had awakened Shadowfire. Jon would assist, drawing on his own Targaryen flame blood. But the question of sacrifice loomed. Would they need to spill blood? Tormund was cryptic, stating only that Lawler would provide a path if the hearts involved were sincere. One night they prepared. Daenerys donned a plain traveling cloak, cradling the 3 eggs. Jon wore subdued leathers, a sword at his hip. Tormund carried small flasks of incense and oil, plus the necessary implements for his prayers. They crept from the manse, telling Illyrio they intended to visit a nearby orchard. Varys, suspecting the real reason, offered no protest, trusting they could manage discreetly. Viserys had drunk himself to sleep, apparently uninterested in midnight escapades unless they promised immediate results. Daenerys was relieved. She preferred to keep him away. Her heart pounded, for she longed to see the eggs crack open, yet feared failing again. They traveled in a borrowed cart, led by a single donkey, winding along back roads until they reached the watchtower's shadow. Torches flickered in the distance, marking some distant Pentoshi farm. The watchtower stood half-ruined, vines crawling over its crumbling stones. The clearing around it was a patch of dry grass and rocky soil. A breeze rustled the darkness. Tormund directed them to form a circle of braziers. Jon helped him stack wood and soak it in oil. The smell was pungent. Then Daenerys placed the eggs at the center, on a bed of coals. Tormund lit the braziers, chanting quietly. Flames rose, stretching long shadows across the clearing. The night air shimmered with promise. Jon felt that same electric tingle in his skin. He took his place beside Daenerys, who knelt near the eggs. Tormund circled them, sprinkling incense that crackled. "Lawler, we beg you," he intoned, "kindle life in these eggs, as you once did in the black egg that hatched for Aegon Targaryen. Let the mother of dragons be blessed, that a new dawn of flame may guide us." Daenerys closed her eyes, pressing her palms to each shell in turn. Jon recalled the moment he had felt the first crack in Shadowfire's egg, the surge of heat that nearly seared his hands. He placed his own hands near hers, feeling the swirling energies. The brazier's flames leapt higher, spurred by the oil. Tormund continued chanting, voice rising to a near frenzy. Embers danced through the air, swirling in chaotic patterns. Daenerys gasped as the eggs pulsed with a visible glow. The green and gold one glistened like sunlight dancing on a forest pool. The cream and blue swirled with an otherworldly sheen, and the red-black egg radiated dark fire. A hush fell, the air taut with expectation. Suddenly, a shout split the night. Jon whirled to see Viserys stumbling into the clearing, a torch in one hand, wearing a half-fastened tunic. 2 of Illyrio's guards trotted behind him, uncertain whether to restrain him or obey him. "What is this?" Viserys roared, glaring at the ring of fire. You dare conduct some hatching ceremony without me, behind my back? Am I not the rightful king? Daenerys stood, panic in her eyes. Brother, we wanted to keep this private. We do not wish to fail again, or... Spare me, he snapped. I see the eggs glowing. You plan to claim them for yourself, sister? And you, nephew, you would help her become a mother of dragons, overshadowing me entirely. I'll not allow it. He staggered forward, ignoring the swirling heat. Jon's hand tightened on his sword hilt. Viserys stepped back. If you disrupt the ceremony, all could be lost. The eggs are near hatching. Viserys' face twisted with fury. All you do is scheme to deprive me. I am the king. The dragons are mine. Rhaegar was my brother, not my father. I outrank you. You will kneel to me and relinquish these eggs. Tormund, chanting, tried to maintain focus, but the intrusion broke the delicate energy. The braziers sputtered. Daenerys cried out, "Stop it! You're ruining everything." She sank to her knees again, desperately trying to cradle the eggs as they flickered between life and dormancy. The green-gold shell rattled faintly, a hairline fracture showing. Viserys lunged for it. Daenerys recoiled in horror. Jon dashed forward, grabbing Viserys' arm. "Don't touch them," Jon hissed. "You'll harm the hatching." Viserys swung the torch, nearly striking Jon. The flames licked at Jon's sleeve, but he yanked back in time. Illyrio's guards gaped, uncertain whether to intervene. The older Targaryen glared, spittle flying. "They are mine, you incompetent bastards. Without me, House Targaryen is nothing." Jon wrested the torch from his grip, tossing it aside. "This is madness. The eggs respond to Daenerys. Let them hatch. It benefits the entire house." Viserys snarled, stumbling. "You conspire to crown her queen with your infernal rituals. I'll kill you all if I must." He reached for the sword at Jon's belt, but Jon twisted away. A scuffle ensued, the ring of braziers rattling. Daenerys screamed as the circle threatened to collapse. Tormund tried to keep chanting, but the tension frayed his concentration. Sparks flew, swirling in the night wind. A lamp tumbled, igniting a patch of grass. The guard rushed to stamp it out. In the midst of the chaos, Daenerys clutched the eggs, tears streaming. She cried, "No, don't let them go cold." She slid closer to the largest brazier, ignoring the smoke. The shells glowed again, the cracks deepening. Jon shoved Viserys backward, sending him sprawling. The older Targaryen cursed, clawing at the dirt. He rose, fury burning in his eyes, but for a moment, he froze at the sight unfolding. A sharp crack reverberated. The green and gold eggs shell split, small fragments flaking off, revealing a wet, scaly muzzle pushing outward. A high-pitched squeal cut through the roar of flames. Daenerys gasped in wonder, cradling the hatching creature. Tormund exclaimed, "It lives!" Meanwhile, the cream and blue egg shuddered, its cracks spreading in a network of fissures. The red-black egg seemed slower to respond, but its shell glowed an ominous hue. 3 unborn dragons were emerging under the combined heat of braziers, oil, and R'hlloreth's invocation. Viserys stared in disbelief. "Dragons!" His voice trembled. "They're truly alive?" He took a faltering step forward, but Jon blocked him with an outstretched arm, no longer needing to brandish a sword. The spectacle alone kept Viserys rooted. The older Targaryen's mouth hung open, eyes flicking from Daenerys to the tiny hatchling wriggling in her arms. The creature was small, no bigger than a cat, slick with embryonic fluid, but it blinked shining eyes and hissed softly. Then, as if sensing its mother, it snuggled against Daenerys' chest. Tormund hurried to the second egg, which now cracked wide, revealing a pale, serpentine shape with faint bluish undertones. Its wings, still damp, twitched in the warm air. It let out a piercing cry. Daenerys, tears of awe streaming, reached out to gently stroke its scaly neck, cooing soothing words. Jon stood over them protectively, ensuring no more disruptions. The braziers flared again, as if exulting in lawless triumph. A moment later, the final egg broke from within, shards flaking away in a cascade. The red-black hatchling tumbled free, letting out a shrill shriek. It flailed briefly until Daenerys gathered it up, bundling it with the others. The 3 baby dragons squeaked and hissed, spitting tiny jets of flame no bigger than a candle's flicker. A wild laugh escaped Daenerys's lips, part joy, part disbelief. Tormund sank to his knees, chanting a litany of gratitude to the Lord of Light. Jon, heart pounding, knelt beside Daenerys, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. The hush of this miracle enveloped them. Viserys, pale as a sheet, shuffled closer. He gazed upon the hatchlings, eyes shining with a mixture of awe and envy. They're real, he breathed. We have dragons again. We can retake the 7 kingdoms. The realm will tremble. He reached out as if to stroke one, but Daenerys instinctively pulled back. A wounded look crossed his face. Then his expression hardened. No matter, they belong to House Targaryen. At last, we have the means to crush our enemies. Daenerys's chest rose and fell with excitement. The hatchlings squirmed against her warmth, occasionally snapping at each other with needle-like teeth. They are my children, she whispered, tears drying on her cheeks. Our children if we stand as one house, but I won't let them be twisted into instruments of cruelty. Viserys' lips curved in a half-snarl, half-smile. Spoken like a naive girl. War is cruel. The dragons will do as we command. Jon glared. She is right. We must be better than the past that destroyed our lineage. These hatchlings have the capacity for terrible destruction, but also for protecting the innocent. If you try to replicate the worst of our father's tyranny, you'll find me and my own dragon standing in your path. He watched the flicker of fear cross Viserys' features. The older Targaryen had glimpsed Shadowfire only once and remained haunted by that vision of unstoppable might. Tormund rose, dusting soot from his robes. My lord, my lady, he addressed them quietly. The Lord of Light has blessed this night. Let us not soil it with threats. Each dragon is a miracle. Let us rejoice and plan how best to preserve them. The tiny dragons hissed collectively, as if acknowledging his words. Daenerys nodded, her eyes never leaving the squirming trio in her arms. The green and gold one clambered up to her shoulder, hooking its claws in her robe. The cream and blue nuzzled her neck. The red-black one rummaged in the folds of cloth for warmth. A soft laugh escaped her. I must keep them warm. I remember reading that hatchlings need constant heat in their early days. She glanced at Jon. Shadowfire was large from the start, yes? Jon shook his head, recalling those first days. He was about this size, though he grew alarmingly fast once he started devouring meat and absorbing the flames of braziers. Expect them to double in size within weeks if they're fed well. The stronger they grow, the more unstoppable they become. Viserys' eyes gleamed. Perfect. Then we must see them fed daily on fresh meat. We'll shield them from prying eyes until they can defend themselves. Once they're large enough to be recognized, no man in the 7 kingdoms will dare stand against me. Not even the usurper. Daenerys closed her eyes briefly. They are not weapons alone, brother. They are living beings, bound to me to all Targaryen blood. If you try to harness them for blind slaughter, you risk repeating the madness that doomed our house. Viserys' temper flared again, but Jon's stern gaze held him in check. The older Targaryen, lips pressed thin, finally nodded stiffly. Fine, but do not deny me my rightful place as their king. I will rule and they will obey. Then he turned to Tormund. Priest, you have served well. I will see to it that you are rewarded when I reclaim the throne. Tormund merely lowered his head in polite acknowledgement. The Lord of Light guides me. I need no gold from mortal kings. But if your dragons guard the living rather than wreak senseless devastation, that alone is thanks enough. The crackle of the dying flames punctuated this charged conversation. Illyrio's guards looked on in astonishment, realizing these lumps of flesh were actual living dragons. Jon worried that word might spread. He stepped forward, addressing the men with quiet authority. If you value your lives, speak no word of what you've seen. Magister ill. They nodded, fear and awe etched on their faces. The group doused the braziers, leaving the ground singed but not ablaze. Daenerys carefully wrapped the newborn dragons, who squalled in protest at being moved from the warmth. She consoled them with a gentle murmur. Torm assisted by sprinkling a few last drops of sacred oil to finalize the ceremony. Then, under the cover of darkness, they retreated to the cart. Viserys insisted on riding alongside, as though to guard the precious new Targaryen trump cards. Daenerys ignored his posturing, focusing on the hatchlings, coaxing them with quiet words. Jon and Torm exchanged relieved glances. The ritual had succeeded, though not without conflict. House Targaryen now possessed 4 living dragons, counting Shadowfire, but the road ahead seemed more perilous than ever. When they reached Illyrio's manse, dawn was nearly breaking. The sky glowed pale orange. They slipped in through a side gate, the guards too bleary-eyed to question much. Daenerys carried the dragons up to her chamber, yawning from exhaustion yet too thrilled to rest. Viserys followed, jabbering about feeding them. Jon accompanied them, wary that Viserys might try something rash. Torm trailed behind, drained by the ceremony, but quietly exultant. Inside Daenerys' chamber, they arranged a warm corner near a brazier. The hatchlings stirred, mewling for food. A pair of startled slave girls arrived with trays of scraps from the kitchen, and Daenerys fed each dragon by hand, guiding them to swallow tiny morsels of raw meat. Viserys hovered, occasionally letting one nibble from his fingers, though the creatures hissed at him. Jon observed, recalling the early days of feeding Shadowfire. Even then, the bond between dragon and caretaker was crucial. He noted how the hatchlings seemed drawn to Daenerys' scent, her warmth. They recognized her as mother. Viserys, trying to impose his will, found only resentment in their eyes. Soon the dragons curled up around Daenerys' feet, dozing in a small heap. She stroked their heads tenderly. Viserys' expression flickered between envy and grudging admiration. Then Illyrio's distinctive voice echoed from the hallway, calling Daenerys' name. It seemed news of their nighttime escapade had reached him. Within moments, the magister burst into the chamber, bejeweled rings clacking. He froze at the sight of the scaly creatures huddled around Daenerys, eyes wide as dinner plates. "By the gods," he breathed. "Living dragons. How can this be?" Daenerys pressed a finger to her lips. "Quiet, please. They are newborn. We must be discreet." Illyrio's astonishment morphed into a delighted grin. "This is incredible, my dear princess. Truly, you have accomplished what the world thought impossible. House Targaryen indeed returns to greatness." He rushed forward to examine the hatchlings, though he stopped short of touching them. "We must rejoice. Imagine the fortune if you reveal them to supporters across Essos." Jon stepped into view. Fortune must wait. If word spreads too soon, we'll be flooded by spies, assassins, and opportunists. The realm is not ready. Illyrio clucked. "I see your point. Still, we can use them to negotiate powerful alliances. The Golden Company, for instance, veterans who revere the Targaryen legacy, or Volantene factions that might supply ships. Let us not squander this advantage." Daenerys fixed Illyrio with a measured look. "In time, perhaps. For now, they are fragile. They require warmth, feeding, and calm. Any rash display could kill them or invite sabotage. Promise me you will keep this secret, Magister." He bowed, hand over his heart. "You have my solemn vow, Princess. Illyrio Mopatis is no fool. This secret remains safe, and I shall do all in my power to assist." Despite his flowery words, Jon saw the gleam of ambition in the Magister's eyes. The man likely already imagined how he could profit from raising 3 dragons under his roof. Tension crackled in the air. Viserys scowled, presumably feeling overshadowed by Daenerys. Torm withdrew to a corner, slumping in a chair as the fatigue of the ritual caught up with him. "All that matters is they live," Daenerys said quietly, stroking the green hatchling's back. It let out a tiny squeak, nuzzling her finger. "We can decide how to proceed once they're stronger." Illyrio bustled about, ordering a small host of slaves to bring fresh coals, raw meat, and warm blankets. Viserys contributed nothing but a surly expression, crossing his arms. Jon stepped aside to help Daenerys create a makeshift nest, layering cushions by the brazier. The dragons scrambled around, testing their infant wings. The green one flapped, toppling over. The cream blue snapped at it, seeming irritated. The red-black hissed, spitting a feeble flame that singed a corner of the blanket. Daenerys laughed softly, enthralled. Even Jon felt a stirring of wonder. These were the first new dragons in an age, aside from Shadowfire, who soared alone near Bravos. It was a moment of history unfolding in the hush of early morning. As the sun fully rose, they scattered to handle their own tasks. Illyrio promised to double the estate's guard, though discreetly, to prevent rumor from leaking. Torrhen retreated to rest, exhausted from channeling R'hlloreth's power. Viserys and Daenerys argued about naming the hatchlings. He insisted on grand historical Targaryen references, while she favored subtle tributes to those they had lost. Jon listened without interfering, more concerned about the next steps. Word of multiple hatchlings, plus the enormous Shadowfire, would send shockwaves across the realm if leaked. Could they truly unify around a single Targaryen banner, or would Viserys' arrogance splinter them? That afternoon, Viserys cornered Jon in the courtyard. The older Targaryen wore a forced grin. "Nephew, we have 4 dragons now, counting your black monstrosity. House Targaryen can truly conquer. If we strike swiftly, we can recruit an army, sail west, and dethrone the usurper. Think of it." Jon squared his shoulders. "The dragons are newborn, Viserys. They need time to grow. Shadowfire alone is formidable, but the realm stands vast. A direct assault would be reckless. We must gather allies methodically." Viserys jabbed a finger in Jon's chest. "You caution while Robert Baratheon sits on our throne. If you won't seize the moment, I will. Mark me, once those hatchlings grow strong enough to fly, I'll lead them in retribution. I've waited too long." Jon brushed aside his hand. "And if you lead them into a slaughter and lose them, House Targaryen's last hope dies. Your thirst for vengeance blinds you. Daenerys sees that these creatures are more than weapons. Be wise or be undone." Viserys flinched, eyes wild. Then he turned on his heel, storming out, muttering curses. Jon rubbed his temples, frustrated that unity remained so fragile. He found Daenerys in her chamber, feeding the hatchlings again. They devoured scraps greedily, mewling for more. She had devised small collars of cloth to keep them identifiable. Green for the emerald one, cream for the pale one, crimson for the black-red. Each sported distinct personalities, hissing or chirping in different ways. A tapestry of old Valyria hung nearby, depicting dragons soaring above a burning city. The parallel was not lost on Jon. He gently helped her portion out morsels of raw lamb. She glanced at him, expression worried. "Viserys is furious?" "As always," Jon said. "He wants to rush into war the moment these hatchlings can fly. Doesn't understand they might need months, likely years, before they approach the size needed for real battle. He's lost in fantasies." She nodded, stroking the green hatchling's spine. It emitted a contented rumble. "He sees them as a means to an end. I see them as a beginning." Her voice grew soft, reflective. "A beginning for our house, reborn not in terror but in something better. If only my brother would learn that. He's so bitter." Jon suppressed the urge to denounce Viserys outright. "Perhaps time will temper him, or your leadership will overshadow his. He might hate that, but if you handle the dragons properly, they'll respect you. And respect means control." She smiled, though sadness tinged her eyes. "I never wished to usurp him, but the dragons chose me. They sense something in me. Maybe it is my fate." Jon's mind drifted to Ned Stark and the lies that had shaped his life. Fate could be a harsh mistress. He nodded, letting Daenerys's gentle devotion to the hatchlings speak for itself. Days passed. The newborn dragons grew faster than any normal creature, devouring meat with gluttonous appetites. Their wings, initially damp and fragile, dried and strengthened, allowing them brief flutters around Daenerys' chamber. She took them out to the courtyard occasionally, letting them soak in the sun, while Illyrio's guards cordoned off the area. Viserys hovered, complaining that they should be displayed to potential allies, but Daenerys refused, focusing on their well-being. Torrhen prayed to Lawler for continuing vitality. Jon, meanwhile, weighed how to unify the Targaryens. One morning, Daenerys invited Jon to witness the dragon's first attempt at open-air flight in a walled section of Illyrio's gardens. The walls rose high, ensuring privacy. She set each hatchling on a sun-warmed stone. They flapped awkwardly, uncertain how to manage their wings. The cream and blue fluttered a few feet, landing ungracefully in a potted plant. The green one soared briefly before colliding with a hedge, squeaking indignantly. The black-red let out a testy hiss, refusing to budge. Daenerys giggled, helping them up. Jon watched with quiet awe, recalling Shadowfire's first flight. Suddenly, Viserys burst into the garden, accompanied by Illyrio. The older Targaryen wore a triumphant smirk. "Sister Aegon, we have visitors, representatives of the Golden Company. They sail to Pentos within days. We must show them the dragons. They will pledge to restore me to the throne on the spot." Daenerys bristled, gently gathering the hatchlings. "They are not ready to be showcased. We risk rumors flooding the city." "I told you that." Viserys rolled his eyes. "Secrecy is pointless now. Word will leak eventually. The Golden Company are Targaryen loyalists. We must harness their might at once." Jon stepped forward. "A single rumor could bring assassins from Westeros, or from unscrupulous lords in Essos. We must remain cautious." Viserys sneered. "You coddle them like pets. They are dragons' weapons. The Golden Company might be persuaded to march under our banner if they see living proof of Targaryen fire. Let me show them the green or the black one, just enough to spark their awe." Daenerys shook her head. "No, they are hatchlings, too vulnerable. If you parade them, you risk someone capturing or killing them for a bounty. Remember how the realm hates Targaryens." Viserys looked ready to lash out, but Illyrio intervened with a conciliatory tone. "My prince, my princess, perhaps there is a middle ground. The Golden Company's leaders are discreet. We might present them with a glimpse, a single trusted captain or commander, in a controlled environment. If the result is a pledge of support, it might be worth the risk." Jon cursed under his breath. He loathed exposing the dragons so soon, but Illyrio had a knack for forging alliances. Daenerys' eyes flicked to Jon, seeking input. Sighing, he said, "If we do it, it must be extremely secret, and only one hatchling. Keep the others hidden. Let them see enough to confirm the rumor without endangering them all." Viserys latched onto that compromise, nodding eagerly. "Yes, one is enough. That green and gold one is quite striking. We'll show them it. Once they see the truth, they'll kneel." Daenerys bit her lip. "All right, but I will handle it. The hatchling trusts me. If anything goes wrong, we hide it immediately." Illyrio rubbed his hands together. "I'll arrange the meeting discreetly. The Golden Company men trust me. We shall do it here in the garden at dusk with minimal witnesses." Viserys tried to exude regal confidence, ignoring Daenerys' anxious frown. Jon placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "We'll watch closely. If any threat arises, we end the demonstration." She nodded, picking up the green hatchling, which chirped at her touch. Illyrio hurried off to make preparations, with Viserys trailing behind, ranting about how this was the moment they'd been waiting for. Once alone, Daenerys sighed, letting the dragon nibble her sleeve. "I hate parading them like tokens, but if it guarantees an alliance, maybe we can avert a worse fate down the road." Jon understood. "We do what we must to ensure their survival. I'll be by your side, along with Torrhen if needed." That evening, as the sky darkened to purple, they gathered in the walled garden. Daenerys stood at the center, The green hatchling perched on her forearm, wings half spread. Torchlight flickered along the walls, illuminating the creature's iridescent scales. Viserys and Illyrio hovered near the entrance, awaiting their guests. Jon and Tormund lingered in the shadows, ready to intervene. The other two hatchlings remained locked in Daenerys' chamber, guarded by a pair of loyal freedmen who had come with Jon from Volantis. The hush of anticipation settled over them. At last, the gate opened, admitting two men in subdued leather armor, accompanied by a single torch-bearing aide. They were grizzled, with the casual poise of experienced sellswords. Illyrio introduced them politely as captains in the Golden Company. They bowed stiffly to Viserys and Daenerys, eyes scanning the garden. "We have heard rumors of your lineage," one said. "If you truly hold the blood of the dragon, we might have cause to speak further." Viserys cleared his throat. "We hold more than rumors. Behold." He gestured to Daenerys. She carefully lifted the hatchling so that torchlight played across its scales. The sellswords froze, expressions shifting to raw astonishment. One whispered, "Gods be good." "A living dragon," the creature hissed, flapping tiny wings. A faint wisp of flame flickered from its maw. The men recoiled at first, then took a cautious step closer. Daenerys murmured softly, calming the hatchling. The captains exchanged glances, clearly rattled. "This changes everything," the older one said. "We have always marched under the banner of Targaryen exiles, but none have offered living proof that the dragons could return." Viserys preened, stepping forward. "And now you see, House Targaryen's might rises again. With more time, we can field multiple dragons. Will you join us? Pledge your swords to my rightful cause as King of Westeros." The captains, still transfixed by the hatchling, hesitated. "We must confer with our commander," one said. "But I'd wager many among the Golden Company will see this as a sign. Still, we will need gold, resources, a plan. Dragons alone do not guarantee victory." Viserys bristled at the mention of practicalities, but Daenerys intervened gently. "We understand. We do not ask for blind devotion. We only ask that you recognize the truth, that the Targaryen line lives and wields the fire of old Valyria. We can discuss terms, but let us keep this revelation secret. If Robert Baratheon learns too soon, we risk sabotage." The older captain inclined his head. "Agreed. We value caution. Show us how to contact you privately, and we shall bring word. But I say this, you have our interest, if nothing else." Viserys looked ready to crow victory, but Jon caught his eye with a warning glare. The older Targaryen forced a more measured nod. "Very well. Speak with your commander. Return here in 2 nights' time. We can finalize an alliance that will topple the usurper." The visitors nodded, taking a final, lingering look at the hatchling. It squawked indignantly, turning away to burrow against Daenerys' chest. Then Illyrio led them out, the gate closing behind them with a thud. A tense hush remained. Daenerys exhaled, carefully petting the dragon's neck. "They seemed convinced," she murmured. "Do you think they'll keep the secret?" Jon shrugged. "Likely they will if they see profit and victory in it. The Golden Company is known for discipline, but rumors can slip. We must remain on guard." Viserys stepped forward, eyes gleaming. "This is the turning point, sister. They believe. Soon we'll have an army at our backs, enough to sail west. With your 3 dragons and my rightful claim, Robert will kneel or burn." Daenerys frowned at his bloodthirsty tone but said nothing. She turned to Jon. "We should return the hatchling to its siblings. They must be hungry." Jon nodded. As they headed inside, Tormund joined them, whispering thanks to Lawler for another step forward. Still, Jon felt uneasy. The Targaryen cause had advanced, but precariously. The hatchlings, so vulnerable, were now the focus of both adoration and ambition. Viserys' hunger for revenge, Illyrio's thirst for influence, the Golden Company's desire for profit. Any could lead to betrayal if not carefully managed. And overshadowing everything was the silent giant, Shadowfire, waiting near Bravos. 4 dragons in the world. The realm might shake apart when word inevitably spread. Over the next week, the Golden Company captains visited twice more in secrecy, each time glimpsing the green hatchlings' growth. They promised support if the Targaryens gathered enough coin and if the dragons continued to thrive. Viserys bragged incessantly, though Daenerys insisted that the other two hatchlings remain hidden. Meanwhile, the cream and blue developed a fierce temperament, snapping at Viserys when he tried to handle it, drawing blood from his finger. Daenerys reprimanded him for clumsy handling, which only fueled his resentment. The red-black remained aloof, clinging to Daenerys' side but growling at anyone else. Tormund supervised daily braziers to keep them warm, while Daenerys fed them a steady supply of raw lamb and fish. Illyrio's estate bustled with quiet excitement, though some slaves whispered that devils had been unleashed. One afternoon, Varys arrived unexpectedly from Braavos. He and Jon conferred privately in a tucked-away corridor, the spider looking grave. Word has reached King's Landing of some unusual happenings in Essos, though no direct mention of dragons yet. But the rumor mill is turning, especially with the Golden Company stirring. We must keep your secrets carefully. Jon nodded. We're trying. The Golden Company's partial involvement is dangerous, but we need them. Daenerys and Viserys have new hatchlings that are developing rapidly. If Robert learns of them now, he may send assassins across the sea. Varys stroked his chin. We must manage the flow of rumors. I'll do what I can to muddy the waters. Perhaps suggest the Golden Company is chasing a false Targaryen. But be prepared, dear boy. The tide of truth may break free any day. Jon thought of Shadowfire again, longing to bring the great dragon south, so Daenerys' trio wouldn't stand alone. Yet doing so might reveal too much. The freedman had reported that Shadowfire was growing impatient, hunting whales near the coast, occasionally terrifying local fishermen. Varys seemed to read Jon's thoughts. Have you considered relocating the Black Beast? If the Golden Company sees it, they'll be doubly certain of your cause. Jon frowned. Viserys might demand we assault Westeros immediately. Daenerys wants to raise her hatchlings in peace for a while longer. The city of Pentos might panic at the sight of that monstrous creature overhead. I remain torn. Varys' gaze softened. Such is the burden of uniting Targaryens. Meanwhile, be sure none in Illyrio's house speak out of turn. A single rumor of newly hatched dragons will bring every curious soul in Essos to your doorstep. That night, Daenerys invited Jon, Tormund, and Varys to a private supper in her chamber. The three hatchlings scurried around, making squeaky roars. Viserys had been excluded. His constant diatribes about war had frayed Daenerys' patience. She served simple fare from a side table, letting them observe the dragons up close. Varys, seeing them for the first time, was uncharacteristically silent, bowing to Daenerys as though acknowledging a queen. They are wondrous indeed, he finally whispered. You have done the impossible. Daenerys stroked the green one's head. Not I alone. Tormund invoked Lawler, and Jon guided me with his experience. We owe them life. She smiled at Jon, who felt a faint warmth in his cheeks. Varys sipped his wine. I can hardly imagine King Robert's reaction if he knew. The realm would recoil in fear or scramble to align with you. War might erupt in a blink. Tormund folded his hands. We must ensure they serve the living, not destruction. The Lord of Light has gifted them to fight the darkness, if the old prophecies hold true. Jon raised an eyebrow. Darkness beyond mortal war, you mean? White Walkers or some other threat in the far north? I recall half-forgotten tales from Winterfell. But do you truly believe that's their purpose? Tormund nodded solemnly. I do. Fire must stand against ice. But that is a future matter. For now, we guard them from men who would exploit them for lesser feuds. Daenerys looked thoughtful, gazing at the dragons. I never asked for such power, but here it is. Perhaps we can unify Essos' better side, like you once did in Volantis, Jon, and then cross the sea with justice, not blind conquest. Even if Viserys objects. They continued talking late into the night, forging a quiet bond. Varys offered to help arrange a safer route to move the dragons if Pentos grew too dangerous. Tormund pledged unwavering vigilance. Jon assured Daenerys that Shadowfire remained her ally if the moment arose to reveal him. By the time they parted, Daenerys seemed reassured. The path was far from clear, but she was not alone. Morning light brought new turmoil. A messenger from the Golden Company arrived, urgent and grim. He asked for a private audience with Viserys, Daenerys, and Illyrio. Jon insisted on attending. They convened in a side hall, the dragons hidden away. The messenger reported that another Sellsword faction had caught wind of strange events in Pentos, suspecting Targaryen activity. They threatened to sabotage the Golden Company's interest unless suitably bribed. Illyrio cursed at the mention of a black market price on Targaryen heads, which soared whenever rumors stirred. Daenerys paled, gripping Jon's arm. If assassins came hunting the new hatchlings, they might discover the truth. Viserys slammed a fist on the table, ranting about worthless mercenaries. Eventually, they decided to pay hush money for now, though Illyrio suspected more demands would follow. As the day wore on, tension escalated. Viserys stormed about, snapping at slaves, demanding that Daenerys help him plan an immediate voyage west. She refused, insisting the dragons were too young. Jon tried to calm them both. Tormund prayed in the courtyard, burning incense to keep the hatchlings' presence hidden. Varys hovered, gleaning tidbits of rumor swirling through Pentos. The city's mood was unsettled, with strange murmurs about new devils or a second doom of Valyria. A shadow seemed to loom over their delicate operation. At dusk, as Jon walked near the stables, he found Viserys shouting at Illyrio's stable hands. The older Targaryen spotted Jon and marched over, face twisted in fury. "This is your doing," he spat, coddling Daenerys, giving her all the power. "She has the dragons now. I'm locked out. My rightful claim is overshadowed." Jon took a measured breath. "You share the house name, the throne claim, but the dragons respond to her because she nurtured them. You're free to help raise them if you show care, not just thirst for conquest." Viserys sneered. "You pretend to guide me, bastard, but you hold a bigger dragon near Braavos, one that dwarfs the hatchlings. You keep it secret. You plot to crown yourself on the ashes of my father's dynasty." Jon's patience frayed. "I've told you we must stand together. If you persist in pitting yourself against Daenerys, you'll lose everything. The dragons choose their mother, not a tyrant." Viserys' eyes flickered with resentful tears, though he quickly masked them. "She was a child when we fled King's Landing. I protected her. Now she forgets who is king. If she thinks to usurp me, You'll do what?" Jon interjected, bristling. "Attack her while she holds 3 dragons? You saw them hatch. They obey her call. If you try something vile, they will incinerate you." The older man recoiled. You wouldn't let that happen. She's my sister and you're my nephew. Or so you claim." Jon fought an urge to lash out physically. "You forced my hand. Enough. If you have any sense, you'll realize a Targaryen feud is the last thing we need. Stop antagonizing her or face the consequences." Viserys stood trembling, rage and fear warring on his features. Then he turned on his heel and stalked off, muttering curses. Jon exhaled. The fragile alliance teetered once more. If Viserys snapped further, he might sabotage them all. The next day, Daenerys confided in Jon that her brother had threatened to show the dragons publicly if she didn't comply with his demands for immediate war. She was rattled, uncertain how to handle his unpredictability. Jon urged her to remain resolute, to reassure him they all wanted to reclaim the throne, just not suicidally. Tension climaxed one afternoon when Daenerys discovered Viserys rummaging through her chamber, apparently trying to seize the red-black hatchling for a demonstration to new potential allies. The infant dragon hissed and snapped at him, scorching his wrist with a flicker of flame. Daenerys caught him in the act, shrieking in alarm. Jon arrived, drawn by the commotion. Viserys, cursing and cradling his burn, demanded the hatchling. Daenerys stood firm, proclaiming that if he touched them again without her leave, she would unleash them upon him. Jon stood behind her, sword at his side, silent but ready to intervene. Viserys, pale-faced and nursing his wound, fled the room. Later, she told Jon in a trembling voice, "I won't let him torment them. He thinks he can brandish them like trophies, but they respond to me. I won't yield." Jon nodded, pride warring with sympathy. "You're their mother. He's a fool to test that bond. If we must lock him out entirely, so be it." Varys and Illyrio tried to mediate, but Viserys' arrogance had spiraled into bitterness. They recognized that a rift in House Targaryen might be inevitable if he refused to adapt. Meanwhile, the Golden Company captains pressed for a final decision on whether to mobilize, noting that each day increased the risk of discovery. Daenerys hesitated, not wanting to move the dragons too soon. Jon debated whether to bring Shadowfire to Pentos for a show of power, but worried the massive beast might terrorize the city, spurring local unrest. The delicate balancing act threatened to collapse. One night, as Daenerys fed the hatchlings, Tormund approached quietly. "You stand at a crossroads," he told her. "Choose unity or chaos. Your brother's path leads to discord. The Lord of Light's flames show me glimpses of a new dawn if you and Aegon stand together. But Viserys is lost in shadows. If he cannot accept your role, he may bring doom upon us." Daenerys looked pained. "He is my brother. I cannot simply cast him aside. Yet I feel him slipping further away." Her eyes drifted to the dragons, who chirped contentedly. "They are my hope. House Targaryen must not fracture again." Tormund nodded. "Pray that he sees reason before it is too late. If not, R'hlloreth's flame may consume all who stand in the path of destiny." Days turned to weeks. The hatchlings doubled in size, feisty and curious, prowling Daenerys' chamber and occasionally scorching furniture. She practiced basic commands in High Valyrian, guiding them to accept small harnesses for safety. Illyrio arranged secret visits from certain Pentoshi lords, each sworn to silence upon glimpsing a single hatchling. The hush of excitement spread. Viserys, overshadowed, became increasingly volatile. Jon spent more time with Daenerys, forging a rapport that blended admiration, mutual caution, and perhaps the first glimmers of deeper affection. He never forgot, though, that blood ties and the cause of House Targaryen overshadowed personal sentiments. Meanwhile, Shadowfire still waited beyond Bravos. Jon sometimes dreamed of riding the colossal beast into Pentos, scattering illusions. But the realm's readiness for 4 living dragons was questionable. One sultry evening, Daenerys found Jon pacing outside her chamber, the warm air heavy with the scent of night-blooming flowers. She invited him in, revealing that the green hatchling had begun short flights around the courtyard. The other 2 followed suit, gliding from column to column. She laughed at their clumsy landings, though each day they improved. Jon smiled, tension easing momentarily. For a while, they simply watched the young dragons frolic, relishing the simple wonder of their existence. Then Daenerys spoke softly. "If these 3 grow to a fraction of your Shadowfire's size, we'll be unstoppable. I only hope we use that power for good." Jon rested a hand on her shoulder. "We must. The realm deserves better than a second Mad King. If Viserys persists, we may face him with or without Robert's interference." Daenerys grimaced at the thought. The red-black hatchling waddled over, sniffing Jon's boots, as though sensing his Targaryen blood. It blinked, letting out a purring hiss. He crouched and tentatively scratched its chin. "They're quite something, aren't they?" he murmured, heart swelling with awe. "They hold the potential to shape an era." Daenerys knelt too, the other dragons gathering. "I never imagined such a gift. The day Mopatis presented those eggs, I saw them as curiosities. But deep down, a voice told me to believe." She cast him a sidelong look. "Your presence made them glow. Tormund believes your Targaryen heritage helped kindle them." He nodded. "Yes, we share that bond. Perhaps that is the truest power of House Targaryen, our capacity to awaken dragons from stone." They lingered until the dragons dozed in a warm heap. Then Daenerys rose, meeting Jon's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. For all your help, for standing by me against my brother when I needed it. If we are to unite our house, it will be because men like you tempered old grudges." Jon felt a tingle at her gratitude. "I serve the realm's best interests, and perhaps I serve you," he said quietly, surprising himself with the confession. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, but she said nothing more, merely inclining her head. In that moment, the burdens of lineage and prophecy fell away, replaced by a fragile sense of connection. Yet as the days progressed, the fragile peace wavered anew. Viserys demanded a formal oath from Daenerys that she recognized him as her king, wanting it in writing to show potential allies. She refused, stating the dragons chose her. Their argument ended with shouting, and Daenerys locked him out of her chamber again. Illyrio tried to play mediator, but Viserys was too entrenched in resentment. The Golden Company grew impatient, suspecting internal strife. Varys warned that King Robert's spies might soon pick up on Pentos' unusual secrecy. Tensions mounted like storm clouds on the horizon. Late one night, Jon awakened to frantic pounding on his door. A breathless guard reported that Viserys had forced entry into Daenerys' chamber, threatening to whisk away the red-black hatchling. Jon dashed through the corridors, sword in hand. He arrived to find Daenerys cornered, the three dragons spitting tiny flames at a furious Viserys. Tormund stood by, praying, seemingly unsure how to intervene physically. Illyrio's guards hung back, intimidated by the Targaryen feud. The hatchlings hissed, scales raised, wings flared. Daenerys clutched a long poker from the brazier, trying to keep Viserys at bay. "You traitorous sow!" Viserys spat at Daenerys, brandishing a dagger. "You'd hoard them for yourself. Deny me my birthright. I am your king. These dragons obey me or none." Daenerys' voice shook. "They obey me because I nurtured them. You come with threats. Release that hatchling." Indeed, he had seized the red-black by the tail, ignoring its frantic attempts to claw free. Jon stepped in, sword leveled. "Let it go, Viserys, or you'll lose that hand." Viserys glowered, madness flickering in his eyes. "You wouldn't dare harm me. We share the same blood." Daenerys took a step forward, brandishing the poker. "I might, brother. Put the dragon down." The hatchling let out a pained screech. Tormund prayed louder, calling on Rhaenyra's protection. Viserys froze, seeing the fury in Daenerys' gaze and the lethal calm in Jon's. The hatchling snapped at his arm, drawing blood. He cursed, releasing it. Daenerys rushed forward, scooping it up. The creature whimpered, a tiny burn mark on its flank from Viserys' clumsy hold. Daenerys' anger flared, tears in her eyes. "You heard it. How dare you call yourself a Targaryen?" Viserys, bleeding from his arm, glared at her and at Jon. "This house has no future if you betray me, sister. Do not think your dragons or his black monster place you above me. I am the king. You will regret scorning me." Jon stepped closer, blade glinting. "Leave now. If you ever lay hands on them again, I swear you will face not only me, but Daenerys, her dragons, and Shadowfire." For a moment it seemed Viserys might attack. Then he deflated, staggering back, clutching his arm. Illyrio's guards parted, letting him storm out. Daenerys sank onto her bed, clutching the wounded hatchling, tears brimming. Tormund whispered a healing prayer, though it was likely comfort more than magic. Jon sheathed his sword, heart pounding. The house was irreparably fractured. Daenerys cradled the trembling dragon. The other two squeaked anxiously. She wiped her tears, fury etched in her features. "I'm done trying to appease him. If he comes near them again, I'll let them burn him." Jon nodded grimly. "He has lost all reason. We must protect you and the hatchlings at all costs. If that means banishing him, so be it." Tormund murmured a final prayer. Rhaenyra's flame reveals truth. A line is drawn. Choose the path that ensures life, not madness. So ended the last vestige of hope that Viserys might cooperate willingly. Daenerys resolved to keep her dragons close, never again letting him approach. Illyrio, upon hearing of the confrontation, lamented that the Targaryen cause risked collapse from internal strife. Varys suggested removing Viserys from the estate, sending him on some diplomatic ruse, but the older Targaryen refused to leave. He roamed Pentos by day, presumably seeking unscrupulous allies of his own. Daenerys posted freedmen guards at her chamber door at all hours. The hatchlings slowly recovered from their fright, especially the red-black, which bore a scar on its flank from Viserys' grip. Amid the chaos, the Golden Company captains returned, expecting progress. They sensed tension, though Daenerys tried to present a calm facade. The mercenaries asked about a timeline for sailing west. Daenerys admitted the dragons needed more growth, and gold remained scarce. Viserys was conspicuously absent from the meeting, fueling the captains' doubts. They left with lukewarm promises, no longer sure of the Targaryen cohesion. Daenerys apologized to Jon afterward, tears of frustration in her eyes. "Everything unravels," she whispered. "My brother is lost, and we have no immediate path forward. The hatchlings are the future, but they can't save us yet." Jon placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You have allies here, Illyrio, Varys, me, your freedmen. The dragons remain your greatest hope. We must endure this rough patch. In time, we might move the hatchlings to a safer place, away from your brother's sabotage." Daenerys inhaled, summoning her courage. "Yes, perhaps we should join your Shadowfire beyond Bravos. A remote location would let them grow without scrutiny." He nodded, thoughts spinning with the logistics of reuniting them. "We can plan that. We just need to slip away from Pentos quietly, keep Viserys from interfering." She clutched his hand, eyes fierce. "Then let's do it soon. I refuse to see them harmed again." He squeezed her fingers gently, forging a silent pact. Over the next few days, they conspired quietly. Varys agreed to secure a ship at a lesser-known Pentoshi dock. Illyrio promised provisions for the journey, though he insisted on vague claims that he'd reap the rewards later. Tormund stood ready to help with ceremonies to keep the hatchlings calm during travel. The freedmen guards were loyal, willing to fight if Viserys tried to stop them. Daenerys prepared the dragons, ensuring they were strong enough for a short sea journey. Meanwhile, Viserys fumed in the background, lurking like a storm cloud. At times, he seemed suspicious but never managed to discover the exact plan. Finally, one moonless night, they made their move. Daenerys, Jon, Tormund, and the freedmen escorted the three hatchlings in discreet crates lined with warm furs. Varys led the way through side gates and quiet alleys. Illyrio waved them off, wearing a disappointed but resigned expression. The Targaryens left behind a note for Viserys, stating only that they sought a safer haven for the dragons. If he wished to follow eventually, he could, on their terms. In truth, Daenerys doubted he'd ever truly join them in harmony, but she refused to kill him, hoping that one day he might relent. They boarded a small, swift ship with black sails, which slipped out of Pentos harbor in silence. The dragons squawked at the unfamiliar sway of the boat, but Daenerys soothed them. Jon paced the deck, scanning the dark horizon. Tormund prayed at the prow, thanking R'hllor for guiding them thus far. Varys oversaw the crew's hush, ensuring no gossip spread. By dawn, they were well at sea, sails catching a brisk wind that bore them northward. Their destination, the lonely coastline near Bravos, where Shadowfire waited. For dragons would be united under Daenerys and Jon's watchful care. A new chapter began. Days later, they spotted the Titan of Bravos rising on the horizon. Jon's heart pounded with anticipation. Soon, Daenerys and her trio of hatchlings would meet Shadowfire, forging a living testament to House Targaryen's revival. The realm beyond had no inkling of the gathering storm. Robert Baratheon feasted in King's Landing, believing the Targaryens scattered or powerless. Other lords squabbled in minor feuds, ignoring the bigger threat. Yet in a hidden cove near Bravos, for dragons would converge, and the fates of kings and kingdoms would tremble. Daenerys, clutching the green hatchling to her breast, stood at the rail beside Jon, the wind tossing her silver-gold hair. She cast him a hopeful smile. "We are free now," she whispered. free to shape our destiny. Jon nodded, touched by her resolve. Yes, and with these dragons, we can strive for a better realm than the one our ancestors left behind. She leaned against him, letting that quiet promise fill the hush. The ship pressed onward through the waves, carrying them toward a dawn that might birth an era of dragons anew, if they could survive the storms ahead.